You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello out there in Archaeology Podcast land. This is Dr. Alan Garfinkel. I'm the president and founder of the California Rock Art Foundation. And what we do is we identify, evaluate, manage, and conserve rock art both in Alta California and in Baja California. We conduct field trips, we have trainings, exercise, we do research, and in every way possible, we try to preserve, protect, and coordinate treasures of Alta and Baja California rock art, of which there are many and diverse. We also work closely with Native Americans and partner with them to recognize and protect sacred sites. So for more info about the fabulous California Rock Art Foundation, you can go to carockart.org. Also, I'm open to give me a call, 805-312-2261. We would welcome sponsorship or underwriting, helping us to defray the costs of our podcasts, and also membership in California Rock Art Foundation. And of course, donations, since we are a 501c3 nonprofit scientific and educational corporation. God bless everyone out there in podcast land.
You're listening to the Rock Art Podcast. Join us every week for fascinating tales of rock art, adventure, and archaeology. Find our contact info in the show notes and send us your suggestions.
Hey, out there in Archaeology Podcast land, we've got episode 110 queued up for you. Willie Pink, he's a man of mystery, Native American, Cupeño, also hails from Luiseno. Going to talk to you about his heritage values, how those relate to rock art, and his perspective. He's quite the authority. He was formerly the executive director of the Native American Heritage Commission. You'll get the inside language on this one. Hi out there on Archaeology Podcast land. This is your host, Dr. Alan Garfinkel, founder and president of the California Rock Art Foundation. And this is episode 110 of your Rock Art Podcast, the only rock art podcast in the world. And we're blessed and honored to have Willie Pink on board, Native California Indian, former executive director of the Native American Heritage Commission, and responsible for some critical legislation regarding burials for Native Americans in California, and many, many elements of his advocacy role for much of his life. Willie, are you there?
I am here, Alan.
Well, God bless you. Where are you located in California right now?
Well, I currently live on the Pechanga Reservation. My grandmother is from Pechanga, even though I'm enrolled at Paula, but I reside on Pechanga.
What particular ethnic group or groups do you hail from?
Cupeño and Luiseno.
Uh-huh. It's Cupeño?
My grandmother was Luiseno. My grandfather was Cupeño. And
those are Takic in the anthropological linguistic realm, are they?
Yes, they are. And also Uto-Aztecan as well.
Uto-Aztecan, yeah. Fascinating. So the way we ought to get this started, Willie, is I asked the million-dollar question. How did you get involved in this advocacy role and working in the realm that you do in terms of trying to preserve, protect, and enhance or educate the heritage values of Native Californians?
Well, coming home from Vietnam was just one of the things that I started delving into and trying to meet with various elders throughout Southern California. But probably the main driver for me was Jane Penn, who was the founder of Malki Museum. And she would send me to different people to talk with them, and then also to go and speak before the county on trying to protect various types of sites. And then also we traveled together to meet with the Energy Commission to oppose, at that time, was the Palo Verde nuclear power project. And so I just started getting familiar with things. She herself was on the Heritage Commission later, and then she asked me when Steve Rios had resigned if I would apply for the executive secretary. So she really was the driving force behind me, because I would meet with her at least once a week where we would sit and talk for hours. Wow. She was a great genealogist and stuff. And then very familiar with so many different things, because she had opportunity where various people would visit the museum. She knew Lowell Bean, of course, Kathy Sobel, and some of the other elders from around that area that who shared a lot of information across the board.
Was Jane an ethnologist, or what was her particular specialization?
She was a Kuya Indian.
She was okay. There you go. Thank you. that was what she hailed from. All right. I didn't know her. I knew the name, but I didn't know what her association was. So I apologize for my naivete. I don't think I'm extremely familiar with a lot of the associations and activities that were done in the Kuya world. So maybe you can brief me on kind of the history of how this all got going and, where you've been, where you're at, and where you want to go from here.
Well, it wasn't, the main thing was not wanting to see it end. It was, we were at that turning point. We were at the tail end of the relocation program where we were being outnumbered by Plain Indians that were coming in because of the Bureau of Indian Affairs program. We were population-wise between 60, 70,000, and they relocated 150,000 Indians from the Great Plains. So we were outnumbered, and all of a sudden we were over-cultured. We were out-cultured.
Yeah.
And so when we'd have events, Dennis Banks, who used to live next to my brother, would actually watched him and his group physically push the bird singers off stage one time up in Sacramento during the first Sacramento Indian Days.
Wow.
And so, it was that type of thing where I saw it become even more and more important that we moved to preserve California culture, California Indian culture.
I think I've seen some of that and, experienced some of that. I tried to help the city of Ridgecrest and the Welcome Center do what they call their annual Petroglyph Festival. And they wanted the whole festival to be focused on Native American heritage, values, and resources. The city of the petroglyphs, the city of rock art, rock drawings. And of course, the reason being is they're sitting on the largest concentration of rock drawings in the Western Hemisphere. And they had a very, very, very hard time somehow connecting with and dispensing anything that looked authentically California Indian.
Yeah, we had a situation where there was a float designed for the Rose Parade that was representative of a California Indian, and all the Plain Indians called in and complained about it because it wasn't representing Indian people. But it was, to the contrary, it was California Indian all the way,
Right. So I think I have at least, a distant sense of what we're talking about here. What have you accomplished? What have you done to sort of deal with that issue and trying to bring an authentic resonance to California Indian culture and bringing it to the general public or to even the native people themselves?
Well, it was, when I was executive secretary, prior to that, I was also a member on the advisory committee for the California Desert Conservation Area Advisory Committee.
Yeah.
So I was a committee member. I was appointed by Cecil Andrus and had an opportunity to really work between the Owens Valley and Colorado River.
Okay.
And working to preserve sacred sites and such. And also it connected people as well, too. My going door to door, in a sense, where I would talk to somebody, one, they knew my mother from Sherman, or, I was relaying messages from another person. So it kind of created a network. And a lot of those people began communicating with themselves. And you find out that there was a certain fear amongst them in terms of wanting to speak about their culture. And so I think that wall started to come down when they started talking with each other.
The different tribes started talking to one another.
Well, individuals,
Individuals, okay.
We try to state that this is a tribal matter, when actually it's more of an individual matter. And it gets a little confusing, especially when the tribes step in and try to dominate what is culture when the tribal leadership itself has never really participated in the culture.
Right.
But that's changing now, too. We've seen a great influx of tribal leaders who are also traditionalists as well. And it's a little confusing for some people, but they are representing both sides now. We're in, I would say, 70s, 80s. It was just the opposite.
So you think the direction things are going right now, there's tribal leaders who are individuals who have a sense of the heritage values and the traditional cultural values of particular groups.
Yeah, much more so than they did back then. Well, because every single tribe in California was under economic strife. And so the focus was on trying to turn things around and provide a basic economy for a lot of the reservations. And of course, that changed with the advent of gaming.
Yeah.
When gaming came in, and it really changed the framework of how tribes operate. So, and now that today is including an awful lot of cultural events. And you begin to realize how expensive it was or is to maintain cultural events.
I'm sure.
And we just didn't have that part of the economy.
No. What did Native people think about where they're at right now and where they've been and where they're headed? Is there optimism, pessimism? I'm sure it's very checkered, because even though we have gaming and we have tribes that are doing well, wouldn't you say that most or many of the groups in California, not federally recognized, do not have gaming and may have challenging circumstances, correct or no?
Well, they do, but then that's the curious part of the whole thing, is because those tribes that are without rely upon their culture. I'll give an example: Grindstone Rancheria. They have the oldest continuously used roundhouse in the state of California.
Right.
But at the same time, they're the poorest tribe in the state of California.
Well, federally recognized tribes versus non-federally recognized tribes, I believe, form the bulk of the California Indian Nation, if you wanted to call it that. What are the implications of that in terms of those that don't have gaming and really are still trying to get some sort of a foothold in all of this?
Well, it just, a lot of his location in terms of, which tribes are successful with gaming and which ones aren't, or really can't draw enough people to make a gaming facility function. But there still is a revenue sharing program where the gaming tribes share with the non-gaming tribes a certain amount of money every single year.
Okay.
The hope there being is that they would use it from a basis of leveraging, but it's up to each tribe to decide how they're going to use that money. But, oftentimes there's grants that require 20% match. Those monies could be used, say an example of an A&A grant. If you're going to apply for $100,000, you would be able to match it with $25,000.
Yeah.
So actually you're making that money grow if you follow those types of routes.
Yeah.
Looking at different things of what you can do as far as improving your own tribal condition.
There is avenues for them to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and
yes.
sort of participate in this economic largesse. So what I was going to talk about next was kind of my experience being in archaeology, anthropology for 50 years and seeing some of the changes that went on. I think the biggest change in our profession is the extent of participation and the leverage that Native Americans have now with respect to issues relating to, the nature of historic preservation. Native American monitors, repatriation, Native American concerns, the amount of sort of consultation and coordination that's going on. Have you seen a dramatic change in that over the course of, you're in your 70s, I'm in my 70s, and so I think we can sort of look at it with an historical perspective, can we not?
Yeah, we can, but I think there's still some problem in terms of reaching some type of equilibrium.
Oh, absolutely.
Because there's still a wall of resistance that's out there.
Big time. But we have come, at least, we have made some progress, have we not?
We have, but I think going back to the beginning, and let me put it this way in terms of when archaeology, what was it back in the 70s, and especially because of the passage of CEQA, we started getting into mitigation archaeology.
That's right. Yep.
So what was mitigation? If I went out to a site as an archaeologist, the only thing I was going to be required to do is sample 1% of 1% of the site.
Right.
And that completed the science.
Yep.
And then the archaeologist walked away and let the bulldozers go loose.
You're right.
It didn't matter that there were 1,000 to 2,000 or 5,000 burials on the site.
You're right.
And they would eventually get bulldozed because that was just the procedure at the time.
Yes, early on.
And so, came the demand for Native American monitors. That met with absolutely strong resistance.
Yes.
I worked as a monitor for free quite often, and then getting into the level of being a paid monitor was, just really pissed off a lot of archaeologists, having to pay an Indian person. And even I object to somebody just standing around just watching. I think you got to be a participant. You just can't stand back and just watch something because you're letting somebody else control the situation then, if you're not an active participant.
Yeah. So those are all valid concerns. Absolutely. But I think I'm seeing, and tell me if I'm wrong, I can give you some examples, that some Native Americans have begun to embrace a knowledge of or a particular position or expertise or career in heritage preservation.
Yeah, but you got to get out there and know what you're preserving.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
It's true. It's true. Yeah.
And I see that as being part of the fault with some of the things going on. I'm trying to remember how many members of the Heritage Commission now are attorneys. How often do they get out and get their shoes dirty?
Yeah.
It's like when I was at the commission, all of our members, with the exception of, I think, one or two, were elders.
Yeah.
And came through that struggle and saw the change and fought for things and then, realized what the victory was in having a Heritage Commission.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that transition now where you have younger people coming up, and I'll say it, just seeking titles versus somebody that's actually interested in preservation. Yeah, it gets extremely complicated, and you know this. Once you get married to a project, it can take you years.
Yes, it
just
can.
On a single site to get anything accomplished.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of dedication.
Well, I think that's it for the first segment. See you in the flip-flop, gang. We'll get into things a little bit deeper.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Hey there in Archaeology podcast land. This is your host for the second segment, Dr. Alan Garfinkel. I got Willie Pink here, who's quite a historical fellow who's going to talk about the genealogy and the direction things are going. And we're going to have a interesting conversation on mitigative archaeology and what all that means and how that relates back to rock art. Go ahead, Willie. I'm going to let you open it up. Ask me a question and we'll throw it back and forth.
First of all, define mitigation archaeology. What is it?
Well, I think what we're talking about there is with CEQA and with NEPA, we're given a mandate to, first of all, identify and evaluate archaeological sites to see which ones are significant. That's really quite a mouthful, but we try to do that. Then we see if they're eligible for the National Register of Historic Places that gives us these criteria. And then assuming it is, then we have to find some way to deal with, minimize the adverse effects of a project. And I've been involved in some of the larger projects of my lifetime, including multi-million-dollar projects, 2 of them now, where we have an adverse effect on the landscape, on the ground, and we're trying to figure out some way to protect, preserve, or minimize that effect. Sometimes that literally, works or sort of doesn't work. It's a head-on with the Native Americans trying to deal with values that they have versus the way the law has been interpreted. And I can get into the details of that. How's that?
Let me respond to that in stating that I know that in the southern counties, there is now more land set aside for rats than there is for Indian people.
Okay. I did not know that. Okay.
Yeah, when you look at the multi-species critical habitat, out there, and it actually bars us from gathering in those areas as well too.
Oh, my
And
word.
that's become real upsetting, is because we run up against locked gates, fences, no trespassing in areas that we've been using for quite a while.
Yeah. So there's that alone.
And that's part of mitigation as well. It's part of mitigation as well in terms of trading.
It is indeed. Yes.
Here's another example of where you get, let's say, an 80-acre site and a kangaroo rat is noticed on there. So what they do is they say, well, we're gonna put aside an acre up here for the rat. Well, how do you know the rat's going to move up there? It's living where it is because that's where it wants to live. And later on, when they don't find any rats, then they develop that last acre too.
Exactly. Yeah, it's silly and it's ignorant and it's offensive. Absolutely.
But at the same time, on the part of the developer, it's intentional.
Yeah, it is. It is. Sure. It's all about the money. It's about the politics. So let me give you this real life example. Okay. So we're putting in 110 wind turbines in Kelso Valley. And every place we try to put those wind turbines in, there's an archaeological site. So the native people would like to see us preserve those sites, protect them, cover them over, and leave them alone. So we attempted to do that, cover them over, somehow protect them, avoid them if possible. And we were able to do that on maybe 25, 30% of the sites. Some we couldn't. Some were on stone, on rock. And we found historic beads, glass trade beads from the 1850s, right there on top of those rocks. And I was recommending that we collect those beads and somehow mitigate the adverse effects of the development. The native people thought that was abhorrent and horrendous, that those were sacred sites. That's where the native people would pray and have vision quests and other things along those lines, and that they should move the turbines. And I was in the middle of that one, and needless to say, the natives did not win that issue. And from the standpoint of their heritage values, they really did not approve of the resolution of that issue.
Well, and that's
a classic case, right?
It is in a sense, and I need to go back to what I was starting to say, because it's kind of in that same area.
Yeah.
Well, in the 70s, we would actually get counties to agree that, a portion of the property would be preserved. And the reason being mostly because it involved rock art, and a lot of these sites in Southern California are associated with rock outcroppings.
Right.
We did not see that they would be building huge machines that would grind those rocks up later on.
Right.
And so that's been occurring at a rapid rate in Southern California, where what used to be preserved simply because they were rocks, now those rocks are becoming road base.
Wow.
And state of California passed SMARA, which allows developers to go in without necessary permit for mining and extraction of gravels, go ahead and develop a sand and gravel operation and be able to not only just use it for their site project, but also export as well. So they're exempt. And what's funny about that is it came on the heels of the passing of legislation to protect Pilot Knob for the Quechan. I don't think they realized the impact it had on us here. Pilot Knob was preserved, and then we lost, I would say, probably a good 50% of the sites that were preserved as a result of being located within the rocks.
That's terrible. And I wasn't aware of any of this, actually. I don't think we have and you're aware of this, I don't think we have the political consciousness, the particular historic preservation laws that have teeth and accountability to deal with some of these issues, do we?
Not on the level that we can compete with the Building Industry Association,
right?
The CBIA. They're a strong force, and without their support on any kind of change, you're never going to get anywhere.
Okay.
There are some things, we do have within our legislature now, James Ramos, who's a Serrano Indian.
Yeah.
So he tries his best, but again, he has to walk that minefield of having to try and please everybody. It's not an easy thing to get legislation through.
No.
And you never know when you're going to be ambushed at the very end after you spend almost 2 years hard work trying to get something. And the UC regents used to be very good at doing that, just sitting back and waiting their moment and saying, well, in the name of science, and then all of a sudden everything would become unraveled. So getting people on the ground to understand that is one of the difficult things as well, too. And especially in a fight for like trying to oppose wind generators.
Right.
How do you explain to them that there's overriding economic concerns at the moment and mitigation isn't going to happen because all they got to do is come back and say, look, we need the electricity and this is where it's going to be, and too bad for everything else.
Right. Right.
And that's the way the laws are written. So
yeah. So there's that side to it as well. I absolutely understand that. And I think, my experience has been that sometimes there's an influx of funding for Native people that comes on the tail end or the feet of some of these wind or solar projects with respect to Native American monitoring. I trained like 50 Native American monitors for this, $6 or $7 million, 101 wind turbine projects. And they made $50,000 to $100,000 for that 6 month or year long period. But the longevity or the windfall stops there. There's no economic or ongoing means of sort of tethering or bringing in something that would create some sort of an economic force or be of great blessing or any sort of positive impact to the wind and solar generating facility. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, see, it comes back to, and just listening to you talk, and this brings back a lot of memories, is why is your voice paramount to mine? If those are my ancestors, if that's my ancestral territory,
Right.
Why are you, an archaeologist, allowed to come in and have a voice bigger than mine, more authoritative than mine? It's as simple as that. All of a sudden, I'm pushed to the bottom side. And I see that a lot occurring now is they don't even bring Native American people in until after they've done their walkover surveys. So I'm supposed to trust people that they, that what they're telling me in their report is true and accurate. And we find out it's not.
And that's a very good point, because when I've done this kind of work, this compliance work, the environmental work, both for CEQA and NEPA, we almost never have Native Americans that are involved with the survey portion of the initiative. That might change somewhat. It's just also, bringing this full circle, there was a book just published from Australia that serves as sort of an example of how to bring in the native perspective, the indigenous perspective of the cosmology, of the understanding of the environment to a study of rock art. And this is the first real book that sort of does that as an example, where you have a full, resonant, authentic voice of the native perspective of what those images function as, mean, the tether, the religiosity, the cosmology, the animism, everything else that is inherent in that, and bringing that in as a primary vehicle to a better appreciation of, call it rock art for what it is. But that's rarely done in the States. I think Stoffel has tried that in Nevada and Arizona to some extent.
Let's go back to the reason why it's rarely done in the States is because, Alan, during the 70s, there was so much force out there saying, these people don't know anything.
Right.
Why should we consult with Native Americans? They don't know anything. The people that are here today are not the same people that are representative in the past via archaeology.
Right.
We had to battle that all the way to show continuity. That's still an issue today.
Look at the recent work that we had to do for the discovery of some of the human remains and trying to deal with those situation. And we have the same situation to this very day with the academic personnel who call themselves scholars, who are directly antagonistic or, directly opposed to Native American concerns.
It becomes a different level in terms of you weren't born an archaeologist.
No.
So you have to go through
That's
a learning
right.
process.
Yes,
And
yes.
that's
You're
true
right.
for Indian people. I don't care. An Indian person isn't born, cultural is something that you learn.
Yeah,
But when you take away their teachers and everything else, that becomes an issue. But then all of a sudden, the archaeologist gets to say, oh, that person doesn't know anything because guess what? We killed off their ancestors, so we sent them to school and beat it out of them.
right.
So
right.
why should we have to bother in dealing with these people? Because we're pretty sure they don't know anything about their culture. But you're going to a group at that time, especially in the 70s, that people were terrified about talking about their culture because they understood how their parents were beaten in school. And it just made you seem like a lower class citizen if you spoke the language or if you did anything or talked about some of the things that you would do culturally.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's not very different from people who, I hail from the Jewish tradition, and it was similar to the Jews who didn't want to be Jewish because they were afraid, and they somehow masked themselves off as something else so that they could not be identified as having that ancestry. So it's not any different. Do you think that's changed any?
Unfortunately, the people that are up in the higher ranks still kind of have that view and vision. Unfortunately, when you get into people like Kroeber who make statements like there's nothing else to learn about a California Indian because I've done it all.
Done it all, yeah. And even the anthropologists who have studied and appreciated and documented particular indigenous groups say the most ignorant and stupid things like, there is no more of this particular group because they no longer exist. That's in print, right?
Yeah.
So some of the worst people are some of the most scholarly, which is not much of a help either.
Up in Central Valley in the foothills, when you didn't want somebody interfering with your project, you declared them to be Nisenan, not Miwok.
I see.
And I actually saw that happen, and that was just because that person had a loud enough voice, knew enough that it was going to interfere with those persons walking away with their $1 million mitigation fee.
Wow.
So they just said, oh, that person doesn't know anything. They're actually Nisenan.
Yeah.
So it's been a rough world. It's been a rough world in terms of trying to bring the two entities together who should be trying to work to achieve the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as I say, every time a site is destroyed. It's like ripping pages out of our history.
Yeah.
And actually what we see now more today is how populous California was, how many Indian people actually lived here. And that goes back to Kroeber and them again, too. Florence Shipek and Lowell Bean.
Yeah.
They start out with this number of 300,000 people here at the time of contact.
Yeah.
I would bet just based on the number of sites alone, you're probably looking at closer to 2 million, if not 5 million people that were settled in here. Yeah. And then because we always look at, well, how, they eat acorns. Well, there's enough acorns to feed 300,000 people. And gee, ain't I a genius? And there's 300,000 Indians at the time of contact.
Right.
Hogwash. And then all they did was back out the number because Kroeber, he was hired to do that work in terms of guesstimating the population of Indians for the claims case.
Yep.
And so another person then, because I got to avoid names here, took that number and just had it divided it into the number of acres in California and said, oh, it takes 6 acres to support one Indian person in here in California.
Yep. Well, see you on the flip-flop, gang. We'll pick it up next.
College Savings Iowa is now iSave 529, and it can do more than take your child to college. It's their passport to a bright future because funds can be used for K-12 tuition, trade schools, graduate degrees, books, and everything they need to get anywhere they want to go. Register by September 30th at iowa529contest.com for a chance to win a $5,290 contribution. iSave 529 for every child, for any adventure.
Hey, gang, we're back. We're going to try to pick it up a little bit higher in the stream and talk about rock art and maybe some of the more positive things that have been going on vis-a-vis Native California initiatives. Go ahead, Willie. Give me something positive.
Well, something positive. I think we're beginning to see more preservation on private properties where rock art is situated. Transference of property to like the preserve over near the Paris area, which is probably one of the better examples of rock art, shelters and of that thing, of quite a complex there. So Audie Murphy, where some of the tribes, got to avoid names, are actually taking stewardship over those properties.
Okay.
And actually getting involved in preservation and have some authority to deal with trespassers and such.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
We're seeing more and more of this link up together to where we can enjoy that type of preservation and to where the public can enjoy it, because there is some control on the situation. When we build houses up to the edge of these things, we also see a degradation of the sites, but at least the intent is there. Then I think it's up to organizations like California Rock Art Foundation, it's up to tribes to kind of step in and do that final element of preservation, whether it be fencing, sensors, cameras, whatever it may take, to try and preserve some of these sites. Because once they're gone, they're gone.
Yeah. Yeah. Which sites do you think are in desperate need of preservation and protection that you're aware of that need our attention?
Oh, geez. We can start with the Intaglios. The Intaglios was first National Registered District in the United States. It was the nomination was made by the Heritage Commission in cooperation with J. Von Werloff. He provided much of the aerial photography for that and the submission, and it was approved. We submitted 500 elements of Intaglios out there, and still the big area that's not been examined yet is Milpitas Wash, because that was the flow route for the Colorado River.
Okay.
We keep going down this artificial route that the river's now been forced to go through without really giving any concern to the possibility of loss of geoglyphs in that Milpitas Wash area. And also it's been partially destroyed by the activities of Patton during World War II as well. All the tank activities. We had a couple more war games out there as well too.
Sure.
So I think it's reopening that situation and looking at it, how much damage has occurred. I've revisited sites out there, and I've seen where bulldozers would drop their blades and intentionally go across some of the intaglios or geoglyphs and destroy them, which goes to a greater question in terms of, can they be restored? Can rock art be restored? I think this is something that needs to get into a discussion level. And what does it mean, restoration? Is that it's in itself some way of degradation by doing restoration? A good example is Chauceanian grinding rock, which has had tremendous amount of petroglyphs on its surface, but due to the fact that it's carbonated limestone, it dissolves in rain, and so a lot of those petroglyphs have disappeared. I think the local Indian people should be allowed to take photographs or follow the remnants of what's visible on there and score them back out again, so where they're visible to the public and visible to the tribal people, rather than somebody just making a decision saying, well, they should just be allowed to die a natural death. That wasn't an Indian decision. That was a Parks decision.
Right. Right.
So,
and we do know, at least I know, other people know as well, that the native people would revere, call it embellish if you will, or somehow enhance the ancient designs and repick them to bring out their power, correct?
Yeah, I would say yes.
You've seen that, haven't you?
Yeah.
So that happens very commonly, certainly in the Western Great Basin, or at least in my own research area. And so that seems to give us a genealogy of that activity, that it wasn't to destroy, but it was to enhance or somehow create but by going back and rescoring it, I think you're revering those images and enhancing their visibility. I think that would be amazing.
Yeah, the other thing with all of the sites, and that's the connectivity, the one site in relation to another site. Why are there 4, 5, 6 mazes out there? What is that connection? What are they using the mazes for? Are they the same people, or is it something that is cross-cultural lines?
Right.
There are, the Topak maze, which is still a mystery. There's a maze out by, is it Mule Mountains? No, it's not Mule Mountains. It's the next one over the Little Marias, I believe. McCoy Mountains.
Yeah.
There's a maze out there as well, too. What do these represent? Direction is everything. And so, when you destroy elements around a site, later on you learn, hey, that was a key aspect to the site, why that site was even there. Then we get into arguments over wave boulders that have multitude of cupules on them, where I've had some people come up and argue that those are xenoliths. They're just, harder rock eroding out and leaving these pockets on them, and they weren't made by human. But when you connect them all together and you've got almost 27 of them in a region, there's a strong connection that you just can't make that analysis from just looking at one site. You have to bring all 27 together.
Of course, yeah.
Which way are they facing? Why are they facing that way? All of these different things that lead us to a greater understanding of why some of these things. And it's kind of amazing when you realize that the ability to look at the stars and actually plot things and make connections, that it takes a lifetime. And passing on that information to a group of people that are going to be reliant upon those things to know the seasonal changes, be able to predict weather, knowing when you're going from winter to summer back to winter. And I think there's been too much focus on solstice without enough focus on equinox, because I think equinox is actually more important than solstice was. These are things yet to be learned. And if we keep destroying everything, we're never going to learn it.
Right. And it's so rare that we have a professional astronomer, or even native people for that matter, that will do the hard work and the scholarship necessary to understand a rock art site, an archaeological site, a sacred site. Yeah. There is an example of that at Mary's Cave in the eastern Mojave Desert, where they've got 25 years of experience studying it. And it is a archaeoastronomical site which has celestial imagery on the ceiling as well as on the floor. And it has to do with the equinox and the winter solstice as well, and the viewing of it from that rock shelter. And there was an extensive book of over 700 pages written online from an astronomer who studied it for that length of time to begin to understand some of the nuances surrounding that site. But that's rather special. That doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, but when you get around to different locations and you start matching things up, and unfortunately, when you don't examine the entire site, as example, we had one site where we had actually pictographs in black.
Yeah.
Kind of a grayish thing. But when we waited, we were close to equinox, and the shadow kind of moved across the pattern between two stones. But there was actually two pillared stones, probably 20 feet high at least.
Wow.
And so then the tribal people, as well as the archaeologists, as well as the developer, said, we got to preserve the rock art. So I went back out there. The two mass stones that were part of the complex were gone, and they were turned into road base. And I said, one can't exist without the other.
Exactly.
The whole purpose of trying to preserve the site was preserve the rock art and preserve, the mass stones that had everything to do with the rock art, why the rock art was there in the first place.
So sometimes you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, right?
Yep.
Yeah. I get the sense that it must be rather frustrating for you being, somewhat on the cutting edge of trying to defend and deal with some of the most thorny problems that Native Americans have in terms of preservation and dealing with heritage values. And you've been doing that for decades, right?
Yeah, and there's still some old sore points. It's like when you travel into Sacramento on I-5 that, there's over 2,000 Native American burials were used as road base in the construction of I-5.
Wow.
One mound was destroyed. They just used it as fill.
Yeah.
And there were several mounds in that area. I believe 2 mounds were actually destroyed. Then the Brazil mound is still partially intact anyway.
Yeah.
Again, that's a shift in culture. It's a shift for me because going up in the Sacramento area and all of a sudden realizing Sutter's Fort is on a burial mound. You have these various mounds around the Sacramento area. And I didn't understand it from my own cultural aspect of it. And, you know, so you have people living on these islands, and were they handmade islands? And yes, they were. That's an awful lot of intensive work going to putting these things together so that they could survive the winters. So you get into a whole bunch of things. And when you get into the foothill and you start getting back into rocky points and everything, and all of a sudden you got petroglyphs again.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, this goes back to one archaeologist gave a paper one time on the lack of bedrock mortars in Orange County. Mm-hmm. And everybody was applauding her for such an observation because she did it through researching the paper record.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, but you failed to tell everybody one thing. There's also a lack of bedrock in Orange County.
You can't have a bedrock mortar unless you have bedrock, right?
Yeah. So, but we kind of do that with a lot of different things. You know, we just, you know, if you were to paint the boundaries where rock art is, Central Valley would almost be blank, zero, nothing there.
Yeah, it's devoid. There ain't very much rock in the Central Valley. And even with the archaeological sites that are there or were there and are still there, they're buried under many, many meters of alluvium. They're ancient. But
it goes back and asks the question, what did they use then for their astrological guidance?
Right.
For a lot of different things. What did they rely upon? Mount Diablo was one.
Yes.
There were several. The peak outside of the town of Jackson, McCulmney Hill. You know, so even from there, even the faintest fire could be seen. So those fires were carried signals, and so there was a lot of communication going on across that valley, and from observation posts. You know, and informing people of things.
Yeah, lots to do, lots to think about. Well, God bless you, Willie Pink. Thanks for your reflections and dropping in and giving us the view from on high.
Alan,
I appreciate it.
I appreciate your time.
God bless you, all you fans of rock art and Native American concerns. See you on the flip-flop.
Thanks for listening to the Rock Art Podcast with Dr. Alan Garfinkel and Chris Webster. Find show notes and contact information at www.arcpodnet.com/rockart. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing this podcast with your family and friends. This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.